My name is Myrna, and I am 57 years old. On the day my husband Harold passed away, I kept a secret that would change everything. As family gathered around offering condolences and sympathy, I said nothing about the $28 million sitting in accounts under my name. I said nothing about the 14% ownership I held in a towering skyscraper on Madison Avenue. I simply sat quietly, a grieving widow in a small bedroom at the back of my son's house, and I waited. Before we dive into what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching this from. If you have ever been underestimated or judged unfairly, please hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because what unfolded that evening just hours after we buried my husband will show you why sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon you can wield. Now let me take you back to how it all began. I met Harold when I was 23 years old, standing in the reference section of the Boston Public Library on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in April. He was 30, wearing a slightly wrinkled shirt with rolled-up sleeves, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he bent over a massive book about architectural design. When he stood up too quickly, the book slipped from his hands and crashed onto the floor between us. I bent down at the same moment he did, and our fingers touched on the leather binding. He looked up at me with these warm hazel eyes and smiled apologetically. That smile, gentle and a little embarrassed, made my heart skip in a way I had never experienced before. We got married exactly 1 year later, in a small ceremony at the neighborhood church, with 30 guests and a reception in my parents' backyard. Harold worked as a structural engineer for a modest firm, and I taught second grade at an elementary school 3 blocks from our apartment. We were not wealthy, but we were happy. Our son Douglas arrived when I was 26, a beautiful baby boy with Harold's eyes and my stubborn chin. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm of school days and evening dinners of Harold sketching building designs at our kitchen table while I graded spelling tests beside him. Those early years felt safe and predictable. Harold would come home each evening at 6:15, kiss my forehead, and swing Douglas up into his arms. We would eat together, the 3 of us, talking about our days. Harold never complained about work, never mentioned wanting more. On weekends, we would pack sandwiches and take Douglas to the park, watching him climb on jungle gyms while we sat on a bench, Harold's hand warm in mine. I thought this was how our life would always be, steady and unremarkable in the best possible way. When Douglas turned 10, everything shifted. Harold received a phone call one evening from a development company in New York. They wanted him to lead the design team for a major commercial project in Manhattan. The salary was triple what he earned in Boston. I remember Harold sitting at our kitchen table, the offer letter spread before him, his expression torn between excitement and worry. He looked at me and asked what I thought. I told him we should go, that this was his chance. So we packed up our modest life and moved to a house in Westchester County with a yard for Douglas and a commute that would take Harold into the city each day. The transition was harder than I expected. Douglas struggled to make friends at his new school. Harold began working longer hours, sometimes not coming home until after Douglas had gone to bed. I found a teaching position at a local elementary school and tried to create stability for our son, but I noticed Harold changing. He became quieter, more distant, consumed by projects I did not understand. He would spread blueprints across our dining room table late into the night, making notes and calculations that looked like a foreign language to me. When I asked about his work, he would smile tiredly and say it was complicated, nothing I needed to worry about. I did not know then that Harold was doing more than just drawing buildings. He was making investments quiet and strategic, taking calculated risks with money I did not know we had. He never told me about the real estate purchases, the stock portfolios, the deals he negotiated in conference rooms high above the city streets. Harold lived modestly, drove the same car for 15 years, wore shirts until they frayed at the collars. We went out to dinner maybe twice a month, always to the same Italian restaurant where Harold knew the owner. Nothing about our life suggested wealth. Nothing prepared me for what I would learn years later. Douglas grew up in this comfortable middle-class existence, never wanting for necessities, but never drowning in excess either. He attended public school, played soccer, got decent grades. When he graduated high school, Harold quietly paid for his education at New York University, where Douglas chose to study business. I was proud imagining my son in a suit someday working in one of those tall buildings his father had helped design. In his junior year, Douglas brought home a young woman named Bethany. She was 24, worked in marketing for a small fashion company in Soho, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from always getting what you want. I remember the first dinner vividly. Bethany arrived wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She shook my hand with a firm grip and called me Mrs. Thompson in a voice that was polite but somehow distant, like she was greeting a business associate rather than her boyfriend's mother. Throughout dinner, Bethany talked mostly to Harold, asking him about his projects, laughing at his stories about construction mishaps. She barely looked at me, except when I offered her more food, which she declined each time with a practiced smile. Douglas watched her adoringly, hanging on her every word. Harold seemed charmed by her ambition, her drive. He told me later that night that Bethany reminded him of the young professionals he worked with, hungry and determined. I tried to share his enthusiasm, but something about the way Bethany's eyes flickered over our simple home, our worn furniture, our ordinary lives, made me uneasy. They married when Douglas was 25 in a lavish ceremony at a boutique hotel in Manhattan. Harold insisted on paying for everything: the venue, the flowers, the band, the open bar that flowed until 2 a.m. Bethany's parents came up from a small town in Pennsylvania. Her father was a mechanic, and her mother worked at a grocery store, and I noticed how Bethany barely acknowledged them during the reception. She was too busy networking, introducing Douglas to her colleagues and friends, people in sharp suits and expensive dresses who talked about brands I had never heard of and vacations to places I had only seen in magazines. After the wedding, Harold bought them a condominium in Queens, a wedding gift he presented casually, as if buying property for your adult children was perfectly normal. I was surprised, wondering how we could afford such a gesture, but Harold waved off my concerns. He said he had been saving, that he wanted to give Douglas a good start. I trusted my husband completely, never questioning, never demanding to see bank statements or investment portfolios. That trust, I would learn much later, was exactly what Harold had counted on. 3 years ago, when I was 54 and Harold was 60, our world collapsed in a single afternoon. Harold had been feeling tired for weeks, losing weight, complaining of a dull ache in his abdomen that would not go away. I finally convinced him to see a doctor. The tests came back quickly, too quickly. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The oncologist, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, explained that the prognosis was not good. Harold had maybe 2 years with aggressive treatment, possibly less without it. I watched my husband's face as he absorbed this information, saw the fear flash across his features before he composed himself and squeezed my hand. We walked out of that office into the bright sunshine of a June afternoon, and the world looked exactly the same. People hurrying past on sidewalks, taxis honking pigeons, pecking at crumbs near a hot dog cart. But everything had changed. Harold started chemotherapy the following week. The treatments were brutal. Harold, who had always been strong and steady, began to wither. He lost 30 pounds in 3 months. His skin took on a grayish tone. After each chemotherapy session, he would vomit for hours, his whole body shaking. I took a leave of absence from teaching to care for him, spending my days preparing bland foods he might be able to keep down, measuring out medications, driving him to appointments. The nights were worse. Harold would wake up drenched in sweat, sometimes crying from the pain, and I would hold him feeling completely helpless. Douglas and Bethany visited occasionally, maybe once every 2 weeks. Bethany always looked uncomfortable in the hospital, wrinkling her nose at the antiseptic smell, checking her phone constantly. During one visit, she actually complained about the fluorescent lighting, giving her a headache. I remember looking at her, this woman my son had chosen to build a life with, and wondering what Douglas saw in her. But I said nothing. Harold always insisted we be welcoming, that Bethany was family now that we had to accept Douglas's choices. After 6 months of treatment, Harold's strength continued to decline. Our house in Westchester, a 3-bedroom colonial we had lived in for over 20 years, suddenly felt too large, too difficult to manage. Harold could barely climb the stairs to our bedroom. One evening, as I helped him into bed, he looked at me with exhausted eyes and said, "Sweetheart, I think we need to move closer to Douglas. I want to be near our son while I still can." My heart broke at the resignation in his voice, but I understood. I called Douglas that night, explained the situation. There was a long pause before Douglas said, "Let me talk to Bethany." I heard muffled conversation in the background, Bethany's voice rising sharply, though I could not make out the words. When Douglas came back on the line, he sounded strained. "Mom, we just moved into a bigger house. Let me see what we can do." 2 days later, Douglas called back. He and Bethany had purchased a 4-bedroom house in Long Island. He explained with Harold's financial help that I had not known about. They could set up a room for us. It would be tight. Bethany had concerns about space, but family was important. The way he said it, formal and slightly apologetic, made me feel like we were imposing rather than family members in crisis. We moved in on a gray Saturday in October. The room they gave us was at the end of the upstairs hallway, the smallest bedroom with a single window overlooking the backyard. There was no attached bathroom. We would have to use the guest bath down the hall. Douglas helped Harold up the stairs, practically carrying him by the end, and settled him into the bed. Bethany stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching with an expression I could not quite read. That first week I tried to be helpful. I had always been someone who contributed, who pulled my weight. On Monday morning, I woke early and went downstairs to make breakfast. I cooked oatmeal for Harold, scrambled eggs. For everyone else, put on a pot of coffee. When Bethany came into the kitchen around 7, she stopped short at the sight of me at the stove. "Oh," she said flatly, "you are up." I smiled, trying to be warm. "Good morning, dear. I made breakfast." Bethany walked to the coffee pot, poured herself a cup, and took a sip before responding. "We usually just grab something on the way to work. You did not need to go to all this trouble." Her tone was not grateful or appreciative. It was irritated, as if I had done something intrusive. She took her coffee and left the kitchen without trying the eggs. A few days later, I gathered laundry from around the house, including some of Douglas and Bethany's clothes that had been left in the dryer. I washed everything together, folded it carefully, and left their clothes in a basket outside their bedroom door. That evening, Bethany found me in the living room, where I sat reading while Harold slept upstairs. She held up one of her sweaters, a delicate knit thing, and said, "Did you wash this?" "Yes, I did laundry today. I hope that is okay. This is dry clean only." She spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "I would prefer if you did not touch my clothes. Douglas and I have a system. I am so sorry. I was just trying to help." Bethany's smile did not reach her eyes. "I understand, but we are used to doing things our way. It is easier if you just focus on taking care of Harold." Douglas, who had been standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing in my defense. After Bethany left the room, I looked at my son, hoping for some acknowledgement of how cold his wife had been. He avoided my gaze and mumbled, "She is just particular about her things, Mom. Do not take it personally." But it felt personal. It felt like every small gesture I made to contribute to the household was met with resistance or criticism. Slowly, I withdrew. I stayed mostly in our room, with Harold venturing out only to use the bathroom or get food. I started to feel like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, tiptoeing through a house that belonged to my own son. The months crawled by, each one harder than the last. Harold spent most of his time in bed now, too weak to do much more than sleep and take his medications. I cared for him around the clock, changing his sheets when he sweated through them, helping him to the bathroom, feeding him spoonfuls of broth when he could manage to eat. His body was failing, shutting down piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do except be there, hold his hand, tell him I loved him. The sounds of Harold's suffering filled our small room at night. He would moan in his sleep, sometimes cry out from pain that the medications could not touch. One night, around 2 in the morning, there was a sharp knock on our door. I got up disoriented and opened it to find Bethany standing in the hallway in a silk robe, her expression furious. "Can you please keep him quiet?" she hissed. "Some of us have to work tomorrow. I have an important presentation and I need sleep." I stared at her speechless. My husband was dying, suffering, and she was concerned about her presentation. I managed to say, "I am sorry. I will try." "Try harder," she snapped and walked back to her room, closing the door firmly. I stood in the dark hallway, shaking with anger and hurt before returning to Harold's bedside. He was awake, had heard everything. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "I am a burden to everyone." "No," I said fiercely, taking his hand. "You are never a burden to me. Never." But the damage was done. I could see it in Harold's eyes, the shame and guilt he felt for being sick, for disrupting Bethany's perfect life. Douglas grew even more distant. He left for work early, came home late, barely spent time with his father. When he was home, he looked exhausted and stressed, snapping at small things, retreating to his bedroom with Bethany. I wondered if he was avoiding us, if watching his father die was too painful, or if Bethany had poisoned him against us so thoroughly that he could not even see what was happening. One afternoon, Harold spiked a fever of 103 degrees. I called Douglas at work, my voice shaking, explaining that I needed to get Harold to the emergency room. Douglas was in a meeting, could not leave. I called Bethany, who was working from home that day. "I really need help," I pleaded. "I cannot get him down the stairs alone." There was a pause. Then Bethany said, "I am on a conference call. Can you just get an ambulance?" "An ambulance. He just needs a ride to the hospital." "I am busy," she said simply, and hung up. I called 911. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, carried Harold down on a stretcher while neighbors peered out their windows. At the hospital, I sat in the waiting room for 5 hours before a doctor finally told me Harold would be okay. They had the fever under control. He could go home in the morning. Douglas showed up at 10 that night, rushed and apologetic. "Sorry, Mom. Work was insane today." He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask if I needed anything. He stayed for 15 minutes, then left, saying he had an early meeting. I spent the night in a chair next to Harold's hospital bed, listening to machines beep and watching my husband breathe, wondering when my son had become a stranger. Bethany's comments grew more pointed as weeks went on. She would make little remarks always when Douglas was not around or not paying attention. "Must be nice not having to work," she said once, watching me prepare Harold's medications. Another time, as I came downstairs for dinner, she muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "This house is feeling smaller every day." Once I overheard her on the phone with a friend, her voice carrying from the kitchen where I stood just outside the doorway. "Yeah, his parents are living with us. I know it is awful. I feel like I cannot relax in my own home. And honestly, I do not know how much longer this is going to last. The father is really sick. I just hope, I should not say this, but I just hope it is over soon so we can have our lives back." I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, tears stinging my eyes. This was what my son's wife thought of us. We were inconveniences, burdens, obstacles to her happiness. And Douglas either did not see it or did not care. 1 week before Harold died, he had a moment of clarity. He woke up around 3 in the afternoon, more alert than he had been in days. "Myrna," he said, his voice stronger, "come here. I need to tell you something important." I sat on the edge of the bed, took his thin hand in mine. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I have not been completely honest with you about our finances." He paused, gathering strength. "I need you to listen carefully." Over the next hour, Harold told me everything. About 15 years ago, he had been asked to lead the design on a major project in Manhattan, a 45-story office building called Pinnacle Tower. Instead of taking his usual fee, Harold had negotiated for an equity stake in the building. At the time, it seemed risky, but Harold believed in the project. The building had been a massive success, now worth over $200 million, and Harold owned 14%. That is, I did quick math in my head, feeling dizzy. That is almost $30 million. $28 million, Harold corrected gently, plus other investments I have made over the years. Stocks, bonds, some other real estate. I've been moving everything into your name for the past 5 years. Why, I whispered, why did you not tell me? Because I wanted you protected. Harold's eyes were intense despite his weakness. I have watched Douglas with Bethany. I see who she really is. She only cares about money and status. If they knew about this inheritance, they would never treat you the way they have been treating you these past months. They would be sweet and attentive and fake, waiting for me to die so they could get their hands on the money. Harold Douglas would not. Our son, Harold interrupted sadly, has changed. Maybe Bethany changed him, or maybe this was always in him and we just did not see it. But I need to know how they will treat you when they think you have nothing. Do you understand? I nodded, slowly, understanding dawning. You want me to keep quiet about the money, just for a little while. See how they act. See if Douglas shows any real love for his mother, or if everything has been about what he can get from us. Harold squeezed my hand weakly. You deserve better than to be someone's meal ticket. And if they fail this test, you will have the resources to live well without them. What should I do? Watch, wait, and when the time is right, you will know what to do. Trust yourself, Myrna. You are stronger than you think. Those were the last meaningful words my husband spoke to me. He slipped into unconsciousness that evening and never fully woke again. 3 days later, on a gray Tuesday morning in March, Harold took his final breath while I held his hand and whispered that I loved him. Harold's death was quiet, peaceful in its way. He simply stopped breathing as dawn light filtered through our small window. I sat with him for a long time, crying silently, memorizing his face one last time. Then I went to Douglas and Bethany's room and knocked softly. Douglas answered, bleary-eyed. When I told him his father was gone, he stood frozen for a moment before his face crumpled and he started to cry. He pushed past me and went to Harold's bedside. Bethany appeared in the doorway behind him, tying her robe. What happened? She asked. Harold passed away, I said quietly. Oh! She looked at Douglas's back as he bent over his father. I am sorry. The words were automatic, empty. She did not come into the room. She did not offer comfort to me or to Douglas. She simply stood there, then turned and went back to bed. The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements. Douglas handled everything, calling the funeral home, choosing a casket, arranging for cremation. He asked what kind of service I wanted. I said something small and simple, which seemed to relieve him. The funeral was held at a modest chapel on a Friday afternoon. About 40 people came, mostly Harold's former colleagues and a few old friends. Douglas and Bethany stood with me in the receiving line. Bethany wore a black designer dress and heels, her makeup perfect, playing the role of grieving daughter-in-law while checking her phone whenever she thought no one was looking. I heard her talking to one of Harold's old co-workers, a kind man named Frank, who had known Harold for 20 years. Yes, it is very sad, Bethany was saying in a practiced, sorrowful tone. And now we have to figure out what to do about Myrna. She has been living with us, you know. It has been difficult. Frank looked uncomfortable. I am sure she appreciates having family close during this time. Of course, Bethany agreed smoothly. Family is everything. I turned away, sick to my stomach. The service was brief. A minister who had never met Harold said generic things about rest and peace. Douglas gave a short speech about his father being a good man and a hard worker, his voice breaking twice. I could not speak. I sat in the front row, dry-eyed now, all my tears spent, and thought about Harold's final request. Watch, wait. We returned to the house around 6 in the evening. I went straight upstairs to the room I had shared with Harold, suddenly desperate to be alone. I could still smell him in the sheets, a faint scent of his aftershave, mixing with the medicinal odors of the past months. I sat on the bed, staring at nothing, exhausted to my bones. Below me, I could hear Douglas and Bethany talking. Their voices drifted up through the old heating vents clear enough that I could make out every word. I was not trying to eavesdrop, but I could not help hearing Bethany say, "So what happens now? Is your mother planning to live here permanently?" "I do not know," Douglas said. He sounded tired. "I have not really thought about it." "Well, you need to think about it." Bethany's voice was sharp. "Your father is gone. There is no reason for her to stay here anymore." "She is my mother," Douglas protested weakly, "and she can get her own place. She is only 57. She is not ancient. She can go back to teaching rent an apartment somewhere. But she has no money. She quit her job to take care of Dad. That was her choice." Bethany's tone was dismissive. "Look, I have been patient. I let her move in when your father was sick because it was the right thing to do. But he's gone now, Douglas. I want our house back. I want to be able to walk around in my own home without feeling like I'm being watched. We have been talking about starting a family. How are we supposed to do that with your mother living here? It feels wrong to kick her out right after Dad died. I am not saying kick her out tomorrow. Just talk to her. Tell her she needs to start looking for somewhere else to live. Give her a few weeks, a month maybe." Bethany paused. "Douglas, I need you to be on my side here. Your mother cannot live with us forever. You know that." A long silence. Then Douglas said, "You are right. I will talk to her." "Good." I could hear the satisfaction in Bethany's voice. "I will go with you. We should do it together." I sat frozen on the bed, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to march downstairs and confront them to tell Douglas exactly what I thought of his cowardice and his wife's cruelty. But Harold's voice echoed in my mind. "Watch. Wait. See who they really are." Footsteps on the stairs. I remained sitting, my back straight, as the door opened without a knock. Bethany walked in first, Douglas trailing behind her. In that moment, seeing them together, I understood the power dynamic clearly. Bethany was in control. Douglas was just following orders. "Myrna," Bethany said, her voice taking on a false gentleness. "We need to have a conversation." I looked at her, then at my son. "All right." Bethany sat on the edge of the dresser. Douglas stood near the door. "First, we want to say how sorry we are for your loss. Harold was a good man." I said nothing, just waited. "But we also need to talk about the future. You have been living here for almost 3 years now. That is a long time. And with Harold gone," she paused delicately, "well, we think it might be time for you to consider getting your own place." "You want me to leave?" I said flatly. "Not immediately," Bethany said quickly, "but maybe start looking for an apartment. Something small, affordable. Douglas can help you with the first few months' rent until you get back on your feet." I turned to Douglas. "Is this what you want?" He would not meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at me. "Mom, Bethany, and I need space. We want to start a family, and this house, it is just not big enough for everyone." "The house has 4 bedrooms," I said quietly. "We need that 4th bedroom for a nursery," Bethany interjected. "And honestly, Myrna, you have to understand, this is our home. We need privacy. We need to feel like we can live our lives without walking on eggshells." "I see." I stood up slowly. "How long do I have?" Bethany glanced at Douglas, then back at me. "Could you be out by the end of next week? We want to start painting the nursery." "Next week?" The timeline was so absurd I almost laughed. "You want me to find a place and move out within a week of my husband's funeral?" "We think it is best to make a clean break," Bethany said firmly. "The sooner you start your new life, the better. For everyone." I stared at her, this woman who had shown me nothing but coldness and contempt for 3 years. This woman who could not even wait until Harold's body was cold before throwing me out. I looked at Douglas, my son, who still would not look at me, and something inside me hardened. Then Bethany said the words that sealed everything. Her mask of politeness slipped, and her true face showed through. She crossed her arms and said in a tone dripping with disdain, "Pack your bags. The old leech does not stay here anymore." Douglas's head snapped up. "Bethany!" he said sharply. But she ignored him, her eyes fixed on me with unconcealed contempt. "What it is true. She has been living off us for years. Not paying rent, not contributing anything. Your father is dead. She needs to leave." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw the shock on Douglas's face, but he did not defend me. He did not tell his wife she was wrong. He just stood there looking uncomfortable and embarrassed, but ultimately silent. I took a slow breath, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Harold had been right. This was exactly what he knew would happen. And now I knew what I needed to do. Okay, I said simply. Bethany blinked, surprised by my easy agreement. Okay, I will leave. I looked at Douglas. I will be out by the end of the week. Bethany smiled, clearly pleased with herself. Good. I am glad we could settle this maturely. She stood and walked to the door, pausing to look back at me. And Myrna, no hard feelings. This is just what is best for everyone. She left, pulling Douglas with her. I heard their bedroom door close down the hall. I sat back down on the bed, my hands surprisingly steady, and opened the laptop Harold had left me. Time to start planning. The next morning, I woke before dawn and took a taxi into Manhattan. I had an appointment at 9 with Mr. Patterson, Harold's lawyer, in an office building near Bryant Park. Mr. Patterson was 72, with white hair and kind blue eyes. He had known Harold for over 30 years. When his secretary showed me in, he stood and took both my hands in his. Mrs. Thompson, I am so deeply sorry about Harold. He was one of the finest men I have ever known. Thank you, I said. He spoke highly of you. We sat and Mr. Patterson opened a thick folder. I assume Harold discussed the financial situation with you before he passed. He did. Everything is in my name. Everything. Mr. Patterson pulled out documents, spreading them across his desk. The ownership stake in Pinnacle Tower, currently valued at $28.2 million. Additional investments in stocks and bonds worth approximately $300,000. The house in Westchester paid off, valued at $650,000. 2 cars, and various personal items. The numbers were staggering. I had been married to this man for 34 years and had no idea we were wealthy. Harold was very discreet. He was brilliant, Mr. Patterson corrected gently. That equity stake in Pinnacle Tower, most people would have taken the cash payment. Harold saw the potential. He was right. My son does not know about any of this, I said. Mr. Patterson nodded slowly. Harold mentioned that might be the case. He left specific instructions. Everything is yours, Myrna. You have complete control. You can leave it to Douglas in your will, give him nothing or anything in between. Harold trusted your judgment. I told Mr. Patterson what had happened about Bethany's cruelty and Douglas's sullency. His expression grew grave. I see. And what would you like to do? I want to buy an apartment, something nice, and I want to establish a scholarship fund in Harold's name for students studying architecture who come from low-income families. Mr. Patterson smiled. Harold would have loved that. Can we do it quickly? I would like to move within the week. We can absolutely make that happen. He made notes on a legal pad. How much were you thinking of putting into the scholarship fund? I thought about Harold, about his passion for design, his belief that talent should not be limited by economic circumstances. $20 million. Is he? Mr. Patterson's pen paused, then he nodded. That is extremely generous. It will change lives. That is what Harold would have wanted. And I would like to keep approximately $8 million for myself, to live on, to manage. Is that reasonable? More than reasonable. You will be very comfortable. There is one more thing, I said. I want to invite Douglas and his wife to see my new apartment, once I am settled. Mr. Patterson's eyes gleamed with understanding. A housewarming, so to speak. Exactly. We spent the next 3 hours going through paperwork, making arrangements. Mr. Patterson connected me with a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties. By noon, I was viewing apartments in Manhattan. The third one I saw was perfect. A penthouse in a building called the Chamberlain on the Upper East Side. 4 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, with views of Central Park, a modern kitchen, marble bathrooms. The price was $4.5 million. I will take it, I told the agent. She blinked. Would you like to think about it? Discuss with... No, I will pay cash. How quickly can we close? 2 days later, the apartment was mine. I hired a moving company to collect my belongings from Douglas's house. I did not have much, just clothes, photographs, some books, Harold's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. Bethany was thrilled to see me packing. She actually helped carry boxes downstairs, eager to speed my departure. "Where are you moving to?" she asked, barely concealing her glee. "You will see soon enough," I said. Douglas looked miserable, guilt written all over his face. On my last morning in his house, he caught me in the kitchen. "Mom, I'm really sorry about how this happened. Are you going to be okay? Do you need money?" I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become so weak? When had he traded his integrity for peace with his wife? "I will be fine, Douglas. Do not worry about me." "Where will you live?" "I found a place. Would you and Bethany like to visit maybe Saturday afternoon? Come see where I am settling in." He looked surprised. "Of course. Yeah, we would like that. Can I have the address?" I wrote it down for him. He stared at the paper. "This is Mom. This is Upper East Side. This is a really expensive area. I am aware. How did you afford to get a place there?" I smiled. "You will see on Saturday. Come at 2 o'clock. I left Douglas's house on a Thursday morning without looking back. The penthouse was empty when I arrived, my few boxes looking lost in the huge space. But I did not care about the emptiness. I cared about the freedom. For the first time in 3 years, I could breathe. This was my space, my home, and no one could make me feel unwelcome here. I spent Friday furnishing the apartment, working with an interior designer to choose sofas, beds, artwork. Nothing ostentatious, but everything high quality. I wanted Douglas to see what I could have, what he had assumed I did not deserve. Saturday morning, I woke early, showered in my enormous bathroom, and dressed carefully in a navy blue dress Harold had always liked. I put on the pearls he had given me for our 20th anniversary. I made tea in my gleaming new kitchen and sat by the window watching the sun rise over the park. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorman called up. "Mrs. Thompson, you have visitors. Send them up, please." I opened the door before they could knock. Douglas stood in the hallway, mouth slightly open, staring at the brass numbers on my door. Bethany was beside him, her expression confused. They were both dressed nicely, Douglas in slacks and a button-down, Bethany in a designer outfit I recognized from a boutique window I had passed. "Mom," Douglas said slowly, "this is really your apartment." "Yes, come in." They stepped inside and I watched their reactions. Bethany's eyes went wide, scanning the high ceilings, the chandelier, the polished hardwood floors. Douglas walked to the windows, looking out at the view of Central Park stretched below. "Mom, I do not understand. How could you afford this?" I gestured to the sofa. "Sit down. Would you like something to drink? I have coffee, tea, water." "Water," Bethany said, faintly sinking onto the white leather sofa. I poured 3 glasses of water from the filtered tap, brought them to the living room on a tray. Then I sat in the armchair across from them and began to speak. "Your father and I were married for 34 years. In all that time, Harold never once made me feel less than his equal. He worked hard, he made smart decisions, and he did it all quietly without needing recognition or praise." I paused. "What you did not know, what even I did not know until recently, is that Harold was extremely successful financially." Douglas leaned forward. "What do you mean? Do you remember Pinnacle Tower, the building your father helped design 15 years ago?" "Vaguely. Instead of taking a standard fee, Harold negotiated for an ownership stake. 14% of the building." I watched comprehension slowly dawn on their faces. "That building is now worth over $200 million. My stake is worth $28 million. Bethany made a choking sound. Douglas went pale. $28 million. "Yes, plus other investments properties. Your father moved everything into my name several years ago. He wanted me protected." "But," Douglas stammered, "but you never said anything. When Dad was sick, when you lived with us, you acted like you had nothing." "I did not know I had anything until a week before your father died. He told me then, and he asked me to keep it secret. He wanted to see how you would treat me when you thought I was just a poor widow with nowhere to go. Bethany's face had gone from shocked to calculating. So you have been rich this whole time? Yes. And you let us think you were broke. You let us worry about supporting you. Her voice rose. That was manipulative. I looked at her calmly. Was it, or was it revealing? Douglas put his head in his hands. Oh God. Mom, I'm so sorry. The way we treated you, the things Bethany said, the things you let her say, I corrected. You stood there while your wife called me an old leech. You said nothing. I was wrong, Douglas said, tears in his eyes. I was so wrong. Bethany was not crying. She was angry. So what now? You are going to lord this over us, dangle your money while we struggle. Struggle. I laughed without humor. Bethany, you have no idea what struggling means. You live in a beautiful house that Harold bought for Douglas. You drive a car Harold helped pay for. Your wedding, your honeymoon, all funded by Harold's generosity. And how did you repay that? By making me feel worthless, by treating me like garbage. I was under stress, Bethany said defensively. Having you live with us was hard. So hard that you could not manage basic human decency. I stood up. I have decided to donate $20 million to establish a scholarship fund in Harold's name. It will help young people from poor families study architecture, the field your father loved. That is what matters to me. Not accumulating wealth, but using it to honor a good man and help others. And the rest, Bethany could not help asking. The other $8 million is mine, to live on, to manage as I see fit. What about Douglas? Bethany demanded. He is your son. Doesn't he get anything? I looked at my son, who sat hunched on my expensive sofa, finally understanding what he had lost. I have set aside $200,000 for Douglas. If he needs it, it is his. $200,000, Bethany exploded. Out of $28 million. Yes, because that is what I believe is fair. Douglas showed me who he is. He chose his wife over his mother. He stood by while I was insulted and degraded. He let you throw me out 1 week after I buried the love of my life. My voice remained steady. So yes, 200,000. Be grateful, it is not nothing. Douglas was crying now, shoulders shaking. Mom, please, I did not know. If I had known about the money. That is exactly the point, Douglas. If you had known, you would have treated me differently. You would have been kind and respectful, not because you loved me, but because you wanted something from me. Your father knew that. That is why he set up this test, and you failed. Bethany stood up, her face flushed with fury. This is insane. You are punishing us because we asked you to move out. We had every right to want our space. You had every right, I agreed. But rights and decency are not the same thing. You could have been kind. You could have given me time to grieve. Instead, you counted the days until you could get rid of me. I walked to the door and opened it. I think we are done here. You cannot just throw us out, Bethany sputtered. I can. This is my home. And unlike you, I do not enjoy making people feel unwelcome in places they have every right to be. But you are not welcome here. Not until you understand what you did. Douglas stood, wiping his eyes. Mom, can we talk about this? Can I come back? I softened slightly, looking at my son. You can come visit me anytime, Douglas, but only if you come because you want a relationship with your mother, not because you want something from me. Do you understand? He nodded miserably. I understand. Then you are welcome, but not today. I need time. They left Bethany storming out in fury, Douglas shuffling behind her like a scolded child. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted but strangely at peace. I had done what Harold asked. I had seen the truth. And I had taken control of my own life. 6 months have passed since that day. Douglas visits me every Sunday now. He comes alone. He and Bethany divorced after 3 months of bitter fighting. She tried to get more in the settlement, claiming she was entitled to Harold's inheritance through Douglas, but my lawyer shut that down quickly. The money was mine, always had been mine, and Douglas had no legal claim to it. My son is different now. quieter, humbler, working as the administrator for the Harold Thompson Memorial Scholarship Fund. I hired him to manage it, and he has thrown himself into the work with genuine passion. Last month, we awarded full scholarships to 20 students from low-income families to study architecture at universities across the country. Douglas was there at the ceremony, shaking hands with the nervous 18-year-olds whose eyes shone with possibility, and I saw him wipe away tears. "Dad would have loved this," he whispered to me. "Yes," I agreed, "he would." Douglas has apologized countless times, and slowly I am learning to forgive. Not to forget. I will never forget what he allowed to happen, but to forgive. Because he is still my son. And in these months of working together, I have seen glimpses of the boy I raised, the good person who got lost somewhere along the way. I heard Bethany remarried quickly to a hedge fund manager worth considerably more than Harold ever was. I hope she is happy. I do not wish her ill. I simply wish her far away from my family. My days now are peaceful in ways I never expected. I wake up in my beautiful apartment and make coffee in my quiet kitchen. I walk through Central Park in the mornings feeding the ducks, watching joggers and dog walkers go by. I have made friends with some of the other women in my building. Eleanor, who lives on the floor below me, is 70 and endlessly witty. We have tea together twice a week discussing books and politics and the absurdities of getting older. She told me once, "You are lucky, you know. Most people never find this kind of freedom." And she is right. I am free in ways I never was before. Free from pretending, from shrinking myself to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. Free from walking on eggshells in a house that should have been welcoming. Free to honor my husband's memory in ways that matter. Do I miss Harold every single day? But I also hear his voice in my head, proud and loving, telling me I did the right thing. I look at the photograph of us on our wedding day, both of us so young and hopeful, and I whisper, "You were right, Harold, about everything." The scholarship fund is growing. We are already planning to expand it next year to include mentorship programs and internships. Young people who never dreamed they could afford to study architecture are getting that chance now. They will go on to design buildings, to shape cities, to leave their mark on the world. That is Harold's legacy. Not the money, but the opportunities it creates. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Harold had told Douglas about the inheritance. If he had left everything to our son in a traditional will. Bethany would have gotten her hands on millions. Douglas would have been wealthy but unchanged. The money would have been spent on designer clothes and luxury cars and vacations to Europe, frittered away on things that do not last. And I would have been pushed aside, treated as a burden, my value measured only by what I could provide. Instead, Harold gave me a gift far greater than money. He gave me the truth about who loved me for myself and who only pretended, the truth about my own strength, the truth about what really matters. As I sit on my balcony this evening watching the sunset over Manhattan, I feel something I have not felt in years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, because grief is still with me, sharp and present, but contentment in knowing I honored my husband's wishes, protected myself, and used our resources to create something meaningful. The money sits in accounts, investments that will continue to grow, providing for me for the rest of my life and funding the scholarship long after I am gone. I live comfortably but not extravagantly. The penthouse is lovely, but what makes it home is the peace I feel within its walls. No one can make me feel small here. No one can make me question my worth. Douglas asked me recently if I regret testing him, if I wish I had just told him about the money from the beginning. I thought about it carefully before answering. "No," I said, "because now I know. And so do you." He nodded, accepting that truth. We are rebuilding our relationship slowly, brick by brick, but it is on my terms now. I am not the powerless widow begging for scraps of affection from her son. I am a woman who knows her value, who controls her own destiny, who chooses who gets access to her time and her love. Harold used to say that the best revenge is living well. He was right about that too. I am living well. Not because I have money, though financial security brings its own peace, but because I am living authentically on my own terms, beholden to no one. In the end, that is what Harold wanted for me. Not wealth for its own sake, but the freedom and power to choose my own path. To not be at the mercy of people who only valued me when they thought I had something they wanted. To learn who truly loved me and who only loved what I could give them. I learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, but I learned it. And now, sitting here in the home I chose, surrounded by things that bring me peace, supporting causes that matter, I can say with certainty that I made the right choices. The old leech, as Bethany so cruelly called me, turned out to be anything but. I was the one with power all along. I just needed to claim it. So to anyone listening who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or treated as less than you are, let me tell you this. Your value is not determined by what others think you have or do not have. Your worth is inherent. And sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the chance to see clearly who people really are when they think you are powerless. Because in that moment, you discover your true power has been there all along, waiting for you to claim it. I claimed mine, and I have never been more free. Now, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone showed their true colors when they thought you had nothing to offer? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I wish you strength, clarity, and the courage to always know your worth. Take care of yourselves, and remember your value is not up for negotiation.